I'll warn you in advance, there's not going to be an awful lot about coding in this. A long, long time ago, as you can tell, my Shandon accent has faded some. I used to work, I left school early, about 16, I used to work for a campaigning organisation in the UK called the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Those of you who are not very old might not recognise the name of the organisation by name, but you recognise its logo, which is what the Americans erroneously called that peace symbol. It was actually designed for that organisation in 1958. I worked there from the age of 16 through about 23, and that I'm adding by way of, one of the things I did there was go out and speak on behalf of C&D in schools and colleges and in front of large groups of people in debates. And I used to do that about 200 times a day, and I absolutely promise you that all that experience will completely not be in evidence in the next half an hour. But it did also sort of like set me up as something of a troublemaker, which more or less defines the last 7 years of what I've been doing here. Before leaving school, I got into coding, well, coding of a sort. I was one of those BBC Micro generation kids. For my computer studies O-level, I wrote a network chat application that works across the internal econet network of the school that I went to. And everybody said, well, nobody's going to want that. And then after leaving school and there weren't any networks anymore, but from about 88 through 94, I fell out of tech altogether because I found that without a network to play with, I just didn't care anymore. And then the internet came back, and I couldn't write websites in BBC Basic, and so I had to learn everything from scratch. I got into the web stuff via being involved. Not even via. Having gone to college finally at the age of 23, I came out and worked as a reporter for a while. I worked on a radio news service in London. Fell out of that into a CTO role because I was the only person in a large company that needed to get into the web who had any idea what was going on, and picked it up along the way, basically. We found Sabrina Dent, who's a very excellent web designer, who, if you have a project you should hire her for, at sabrinadent.com, who's my wife, and we live about 300 yards away from here. She and I found ourselves in roughly July the 6th, 2005, working out a little calculation about, we were living in a 2-bedroom flat in Stratford in the East End of London. And the rent was the rent was 950 sterling, and then we had council tax every month of about 140, and then bills that you couldn't avoid, and the internet and whatnot. And we worked out that we could, in euros, the amount of money we had to spend every year was about 20,000 euros before we could eat anything in any given year. And the next day, they decided to hold the Olympics at the end of our street. Literally at the end of our street. And I'm an Irish citizen by birth, as I might have mentioned. Sabrina's American. And we decided that the correct response to somebody deciding to build the entire Olympic Park 300 yards away from your front door is to shout, "Taxi!" Where are we going to go next? Edinburgh was a choice. We didn't go to Edinburgh because it was too near her in-laws. Couldn't go to Dublin because it was in the middle of the Celtic Tiger, and Dublin thought it was worth as much money as central London. And Cork was next on the list of places we went. And we moved here on September the 1st, 2005. And I'd never been here before in my life when I got off the plane. Despite the fact that it turns out pre-adoptively I'm actually from here. One of the things I found quite early on, we both work at home, so it was fine, moving house was easy, but most of our clients were in the UK, and I worked for a Democrat-leaning campaign web development company in the US, and so we just upped sticks and moved over. But one of the things I found just by being a resident of Cork City is that this, which is out of focus, is there a focus button on this? Will? No, he's not here. I'll come out anyway. I'm just going to assume that's going to pass on its own. Yes, this is a website from the UK called writetothem.com. Basically, I mean, it does what it says on the tin here. But the main thing it used to, lots of people use it, and they kind of take this as a failure, but it's not, because MySociety.org, who run a lot of civic websites in the UK, are now very interested in transactions. It's like, and they measure their the efficacy of the things that they build by how many people use them to actually go start at the front page and then go all the way through the funnel to the end. The thing is, this has two funnels, and the first one is really useful. Here's the postcode that we used to have in Stratford entered in. I just screenshotted it earlier on. The idea of this is, if you want to write to your Member of Parliament, you don't need to know who your Member of Parliament is, and this is kind of going to be a recurring theme. All you do is you enter your postcode, and the next page you get is a list of everybody at every level of government who represents you. What you can see here, first of all, are the 3 councillors for the Stratford and Newtown ward of Newham Council, and then the beginning of the list of members of the London Assembly for the same area. Lower down there's the Member of Parliament, lower down than that is a member of the European Parliament. All these names are in blue because all the names are links. You click on a name, you write a letter to one of these people and they deliver it for you. Now actually, I don't think I ever went past this page when I was looking at it, because this is actually quite a useful transaction thing in its own right. This is a service where you can enter a postcode and find out who in the name of crap your MP is. And living on the Mardyke, which we did when we first moved here, that was a matter of some dispute, and there is no website in Ireland that would answer that question for us in Cork. Which constituency am I in the Mardyke? Because it's one of those parts of the city that gets moved between North Central and South Central every 4 years, every time there's a boundary revision, and the City Council doesn't have a map even of which of the local electoral areas cover which parts of the city, except in a very low resolution version. And so I really wanted to do this. It's like, because this doesn't exist in Ireland, let's have a go at that. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, we don't have postcodes, but it was 2005 and we were definitely getting postcodes in the next 18 months. So, so I wasn't too bothered about that. But in the meantime, what else have we got? And we hit on the idea of we can't get the electoral register, but there is a thing called the index to the electoral register, which lists all the townlands and in cities all the streets in a place, and it's at the back of the electoral register, and basically it just shows you which streets are in which wards, or district electoral divisions as we would call them here. So we went around there and a bunch of people came together to help me contact every local authority in the council and ask them for a copy of the index to the electoral register. And that worked really well in places like Dublin City, where not only did their index was really good, because when a street was divided between 2 district electoral divisions, they would have an entry for one side and the other side, and they would list the door numbers. So you could do an auto-fill search, auto complete search box. You start typing your address in, it picks the thing, and then you get to Cork County Council, which doesn't do that, and to put it mildly. And then you get to Cork City Council, and they said, no, you can't have it, because it's proprietary ordnance survey data. And we asked Cork City Council, was like, well, 31 other councils just handed it over, and they're like, no, fuck you. So that was sort of the end of that project for the time being. And here we are, they're coming up on 10 years ago now. And then we find, so the next question, now I've got a bee in my bonnet about this stuff. See above with troublemaking. So what is doable with what we have, I wonder? Is there anything that my society does in the UK that you can do without needing postcodes or access to substantial amounts of geodata? And I'm going to fix my street, perhaps. No, that's very, very heavily dependent on geodata, and we'll come to that in a little while. But they did have one thing called They Work For You. And if you've ever seen Kildare Street before, this screenshot of They Work For You from the time, it doesn't look like this anymore, will look very familiar, because Kildare Street is exactly this website. What it does is it shows you, let's fire up pan over to a browser here, because if anybody here is not familiar with Kildare Street, it suddenly occurred to me that I really should have added something useful there. Let's go to the only significantly length debate that happened on Friday last. You can't read this because it's out of focus, but basically what you have is a nice friendly way of rendering debates that happen. The Hansard, the official report of Dáil and Seanad Éireann, and all the written questions, and more recently everything that happens in committees. You find here that speakers have little photographs next to them. Sean Crowe of Sinn Féin is the speaker at the beginning of this debate because he's proposing a motion. Sean Crowe's name is a link. If we click on his name, there's an information page all about Sean Crowe TD. There's a box here that says voting record that has been blank since Kildare Street opened, which is like 6 years ago now, and we're trying to deal with that later on. Because of what we do with slicing up all the data in the that we get and process it and run it through a search engine, we are able to see these special educational needs, school staffing, human rights issues are things that he has asked parliamentary questions about. This information is automatically derived from the section titles of the questions that he's asked. Here are the things he's written recently. He said recently, the last 3 contributions he's made, which are all from the debate you just saw. Here are some statistics which are deliberately fuzzied up and not precise, and we don't rank TDs in order because it's not reasonable to do so. But we can tell you that he's spoken in 112 different committee meetings or debates. We haven't told you how many times he's spoken because that's the sort of bullshit statistic that that newspapers like to use at the end of the year, where the guy who says infrequently contributes 1,000-word speeches to debates gets outranked by somebody like Jerry Buttimer, who says something pithy in 3 words every 5 minutes. Don't get me wrong, actually, Jerry, regardless of Jerry's political opinions, most of which I don't share, he is, I think, one of the more diligent TDs we have. Sean Crowe has had answers to 120 written questions in the last 12 months. It's not exactly in the last year because we only update this number once a week. And that's said, we say that's average, because instead of ranking people in order, we group them into 5 quintiles and make people average, above average, below average, well above average, or well below average. How many people have commented on things he says, how understandable what he says is, according to the Fleisch-Kincaid grade level index. Here's a link so you can sign up to an alert for every time that, if you want to get an email every time Sean Crowe says something in the Dáil. We will do that if you click that link and fill in your email address, and then there's this deliberately stupid statistic at the end in order to draw your attention to why you shouldn't draw conclusions from stupid statistics. Below this, here's his entry in the Register of Members' Interests. Gavin Sheridan of the Story.ie once a year gets the entire Register of Members' Interests in a PDF through Freedom of Information request to the orators. He transcribes every single box into a spreadsheet, and we convert that into an XML file that we feed into this website. You can see the history of this member's entries in the Register of Interests, so you can see what has changed, whether this person now has directorships of more or fewer companies than he used to. Here's a box that I can see and you can't, because it only shows to me because it's old data. But we have been trying to compile all the expenses of every member of parliament, Dáil and Seanad, since but going back to 2005. But getting that information is one thing. Well, publishing that information, if we have it, is one thing, but actually getting it is another. I have lots of expenses data, but it doesn't include things like ministerial income, and therefore if we published it, you'd get a misleading impression. So I've made an editorial decision not to run that data until it's completely complete, if you see what I mean. The thing about Kildare Street, They Work For You, was a PHP app that was available on, well, not even GitHub at the time, it was in the CVS repository because this was a while ago now. So it was a PHP thing that I could pick through and install, and they had some very, very old internal wiki documentation about what the data structures meant from My Society's own internal thing, so I could work out what the database, what's a level 6 versus a level 9? Well, it's actually 12 and 13 level headings in the XML format that this thing ingests. one of them is procedural text, and one of them is a minor heading, and you have to work. But you pick this thing up. It's not a spoon-feedable thing, but if you're reasonably smart, and I'm only reasonably smart, I am not a great programmer by any stretch of the imagination, you can pick this stuff together. But what I had here at Bar Camp in Cork in 2008 was this website with nothing in it except all the TDs and senators and no speech data and nothing that actually happened. Because installing it is easy and making a list of 226 people isn't all that difficult, but taking years of stuff that's available on the Oireachtas debates website and converting it into structured format so as you can do something sensible with it is a much bigger job. Almost impossible, we thought. And then, let's go back to the slides momentarily. At the time, this is what the parliamentary debates website looked like at Leinster House. This over here, breaking out of its column, this is actually an accurate rendering. It says search, but you couldn't actually search anything at all on this website, because if you typed in anything remotely complicated, the server would just time out. And if you did it enough times in 3 minutes, you could actually crash the entire web server. For about 10 minutes every time. I say it looked like this. What it actually looked like, if you hadn't remembered to remove your mouse from your browser viewport, what it actually looked like was this, because everything had an underline hover on it. And I'm only including this slide to give some sort of impression about the lavish attention to detail that people made when they were putting this website together. But the URL of the page you just saw was this. And over here, you see a reference to an XML file and what looks like a date and a chamber. So I thought, I wonder if that's on the website, on the web server anywhere. So I just started randomly poking around addresses looking for this file. Because it's not linked from anywhere. But there's a couple of references, 30 might be, it turned out a subdirectory off the main thing. Basically, I found this file and 5 years worth of data like them hiding in the same directory as the style sheet. So we'll have those, because if they're actually making this god-awful website from some structured data that's slightly less god-awful, massive assumption as it turned out, then, well, at least I won't have to scrape the entire thing, pass it into whatever. So, we eventually did do that, and you get the website that you see now. Where am I? I wrote notes up there a little while ago, and I'm just blabbing on, and I'm going in roughly the right direction. Subsequently, Kildare Street is doing very well. I mean, it had a massive launch day, and within about a month of opening in April of 2009, it's gone from a standing start to 30,000 unique visitors every 4 weeks, according to Google Analytics. And once they've got a success on their hand, the Oireachtas puts up this page and goes, yeah, look, we've got XML. They've never advertised this before, but once Kildare Street finds it and starts using it, they start telling people that they've got all this stuff in structured data format, and start plugging it on a website, on their own website, and telling people that it exists. In doing so, they had, at this point, they had everything from 2007 up to the present day in structured format for all the DOL, all the Shannon, every written answer, and every committee meeting was in a structured XML format of their own choosing. The way that they had this done is basically their transcription system would be, people would transcribe stuff from audio into a database. That would export these XML files that I found, and the Oireachtas would then use them both primarily to generate the printed record that they ship out to libraries that nobody ever reads, which is the main purpose of it. And secondly, and in a very much ancillary way, they would use the same file to slap into their, at the time, horrifically awful website. corpus of stuff, which later on acquired everything going back to 1922, suddenly became Europe's largest structured open data project from any part of any national government. Which is brilliant, right? So, obviously they'd have to fix that eventually. And because, being the best at something is not something that any part of the Irish state is comfortable with. So, this data wasn't great. I'll show you an example here, if you can make this even slightly made up. An example of, there were some data quality issues, apart from the fact that, lots of the time, despite the fact that the debates office at the Leinster House says that every transcript for the Dáil and Seanad will come out either the same day or the next day, that wasn't true. Things would turn out late, things were coming out of order, and most troublingly of all, here are about 20 examples of their internal system assigning a vote in Parliament to one person and then telling you it was Beverley Cooper Flynn instead. And when queried on this, should we pay attention to the name you printed or to the name in the database of who did the vote, they didn't know. And then they committed all of these to paper. So it turns out, we found out, well, indirectly, just because by tracking bugs, that there is a very high chance that quite a lot of the voting records that are in the official printed record of transcripts of the Houses of the Oireachtas assign votes to the wrong people in print and then commit them to permanent posterity, which I thought was a little bit troublesome. Anyway, but this we used to complain when they got things horrifically wrong, and that caused a number of people apparently to dislike us inside Leinster House. I got word from somebody inside the building around about 18 months after we started that they were planning to rebuild their transcription system, and I got this, which should have been slightly portentous piece of information, that among the things they were going to do when they were building the new system, making Kildare Street's life easier was not going to be a project priority. But the thing's not going to happen for another 18 months, so I didn't worry about it too much. Then we get to, they went off to the summer holidays in 2012, and then they came back, and all of our stuff kind of automatically fires up, goes looking for the XML file from yesterday. And first of all, the website's down for the whole day on September the 19th, the day after the first sitting. And then secondly, nothing happens. No data appears. The website is no longer updated at all. They've moved the entire thing, it turns out. Debates.oireachtas.ie, where all this stuff lives, which still exists, stops in time on the day before, the sitting day before September the 18th, 2012. And then there's another website that looks just like it, which came into effect on this day, called oireachtasdebates.oireachtas.ie. For some reason, who knows. When they said not making our lives easier, they were going to take this the largest structured open data project of any government department anywhere in Europe, and they decided just to dump it. That's it, mothballed, gone. And that's what they meant by not making our lives easier. They were shutting it down. When they were speccing out the new project, they had a list of all the things that the existing system did, one of which was spitting out structured data so as other people could use it. And they said, no, we don't like them. They're mean to us when we get things wrong. Let's not recreate that in the new system. At which point, pretty much all fucking hell broke loose. Because nobody in Leinster House, let alone everywhere else, is using the official website anymore, because it doesn't even have a search engine. Almost everybody at this point is already using Kildare Street, and they've shut it. It's gone. There's no site. There's no information. All the XML that used to be there is no longer being published. I kicked off a bit of a Twitter storm at about 11 o'clock at night, and I got up the next morning, and the phone is going off the hook because every newspaper in the country is going, the hell. And then lots of TDs are phoning and going, the hell. And I'm telling them exactly what's happened. There there are stories like this. There's all a journal. There are lots of blog entries. You know, the usual hoo-ha, and exactly like everything you would expect to happen in Ireland. Regardless of how much noise is out, it's too late for them to do anything about this. The damage is done. The contract is done. IBM Fujitsu has got its money and left the building already. This is it. 25 parliamentary questions, apparently, were asked. Were submitted to the Concollier of Dáil Éireann, asking what exactly we can do about it, or complaining, or in some way. But you can't ask parliamentary questions to the Parliament, or to the Concollier, or to the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission, in a weird quirk of the way the civil service works and the weird quirk of government oversight here. There is a department of the government, the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission, which is not subject to parliamentary scrutiny. Nominally, the Oireachtas answers to itself, but individual TDs therefore can't ask questions on the record to the Concollier. The Oireachtas Commission contains 12 people who are not selected for their inquisitorial rigour. We filed an official complaint to the House of the Oireachtas Commission at this point during the shitstorm, the morning of their next meeting, and then phone calls were coming back to me through third parties going, I don't know what you did, but something really heavy is going on, because this meeting that usually lasts 15 minutes lasted for 6 hours. And they were calling staff in from all over the building going, what the hell is going on? And then a month later, the minutes of the meeting came out, and that entire 6-hour discussion hadn't happened. And to this date, I still haven't had a reply from even one of the 12 members of the House of the Oireachtas Commission asking for a response to what we did. The staff, in response to their this sort of press coverage, then offered to reinstate access to structured data for us, so that we could restart Kildare Street, which by several days on hasn't been updated at all. They said basically this: we can restart access to you, but we're not going to start publishing it. We'll give you specifically an end user license to data in the same format that we had before. And it will say, amongst other things, this. The end user agreement will involve an undertaking by me that issues with the XML will be brought to the attention of the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission and to their staff, and to nobody else. And if you break this, breach of this undertaking will be sufficient grounds to terminate your access to the data. It's basically, they cut off access to the structured data so that we would stop criticising the quality of that data, and then offered to reinstate access to the data if I signed a gagging order, promising to never tell anybody again outside of themselves when they were cocking things up. So of course I said, yes, all right. This was not the answer they were expecting, because they were unable to actually do this. We said yes, we signed a piece of paper, I couriered it with the actual ink on paper back to the people who asked for this, and then nothing happened. Because when they made this offer, they knew it couldn't be done. So certain were they that I would tell them to shove it up their arse. In the meantime, the new website appears, and it's not great. Here's Rory Quinn answering this parliamentary question from Claire Daly with a login form. Here's the silver-tongued devil Brendan Howland saying, error in library HTTP requests routine do post. So basically, we're going to have to start again. So it's October by this point in 2012. It's a couple of days into October. We're getting absolutely nowhere with these people because basically they're just lying to us. And after I agreed to this gagging order so as we could get the data, which is the answer they weren't expecting, the people who made the offer then went to the newspapers and told them that I'd rejected their entirely reasonable offer. and got paid money to do it, which I find slightly irritating. So we put an appeal together. Internet, please, I actually need some money here because this is going to take quite a long time. The zombie appeal, I don't know if anybody's familiar with, but we ran it from about the 3rd of October to the end of the month. I had literally no idea whether anybody was ever going to give us money. We certainly didn't set a target because I had no idea what the target should be. But we came out at the end of October and the internet has gifted to us about 9,000 quid, which is enough to put somebody half-time on permanently on fixing this thing. And of course, fixing this thing basically means doing Koivisto in the way that we absolutely didn't want to do it the first time around, which is like going to the Oireachtas website, downloading every single page from a day's transcript, munging them up into a big file, scraping the stuff out, and then throwing the scraped HTML into a parser. But that's what we got. And the new parser doesn't throw this data into our database like the first one did. What we do instead is our scraper and parser programs output XML in the exact same XML format that the British They Work For You project uses, and that the Australian openaustralia.org, which will also, you'll notice, looks exactly like Koivisto as well. Because there's some back-end stuff that we got from the UK that we'd never been using that actually handles that XML format natively. So if you're ever doing this for any other purpose, our recommendation is to don't target your own app when you're scraping data and passing it into a format. Spit it out into an intermediate format that doesn't change, and then work with that, which is what I should have done the first time. Not that it would have made an enormous amount of difference here, but it would have saved me a couple of weeks at the very end. So we built the whole thing from scratch. 6 months, give or take, go past during this process. Finally, it lives once again. And in order so that other people don't have to do this in future, every parliamentary day since September the 18th, 2012 can be found here on GitHub. In JSON and in the aforementioned public web XML format, and you can find it at github.com/shove your gagging order up your ass. Other people have subsequently actually used this. It updates it automatically. The Git repository is updated from what we've generated ourselves during the course of the last 24 hours. It just auto commits every night. One or two other projects have actually used this. One of the things in the data directory is a third party who was doing some data mining wrote a crude search tool that works not on Koivisto or doesn't use the API, but actually just reads through the raw XML and spits out search parameters. He was using it for a data thing. He committed it in. There's I think it's in Python. I've never used it myself, but I thought, yes, boom, we'll add that. Thank you very much. So yeah, if you want to work with structured parliamentary data from the last 3 years, you can find it here. Now that makes me the largest publisher of government open data in Ireland. That shouldn't be true. But what you do get if you use a common format, I don't have a slide for that. What you do get if you have a common format is, once I've got everything in the same format as the UK, I can then go back to what the Australians and the Brits have written and see whether anything they've written that works with that particular XML format that they've already got can be used for other things that we have. And it turns out that the answer to that question is yes. And a year ago, it turns out today, according to whatever that time hop, my phone said that the anniversary of this is today. A year ago today, we added every single committee meeting that had happened for every single one of the Dole and Shannon and Joint Select Committees since, again, September the 18th, 2012. We added all in one go to Koivisto, thus increasing the amount of verbiage that you can find in the search engine and all that sort of stuff by about 14 million words at a stroke. Using a lesson mostly for why you shouldn't reinvent wheels when there's a perfectly serviceable wheel in London with staff behind it that are helping you out. Since then, our traffic's gone up 60%, despite the fact we only added about 15% more data. What we think has happened is that because now we have everything, absolutely everything that's said out loud in Leinster House is on KildaireStreet.com, nobody now goes to the other site at all. Nobody likes it, and they had to use it before. Now they don't have to use it at all, so we're getting all of their traffic. We got 300,000 unique visitors, of whom 92% are in Ireland during 2014. And basically, in the old Microsoft style, I'm kind of now fighting back with the strategy of embrace and extend and extinguish. At the point that nobody needs to go to the official website anymore. Nobody really cares what the official website looks like. And I certainly don't. And since they told the press that I had refused the offer that we'd accepted, absolutely all conversation between us and the management at Leinster House ceased on that day, nearly 2 years ago. What I want to do next is, again, another thing that we got for free when we started using this structured data format is we were able to put original references back to the Oireachtas's own website. So every individual speech links back to its counterpart on Oireachtas.ie. One of the things I want to do, I said embrace and extend. The extinguish part includes, and if anybody here is handy with this sort of thing, please do get in touch afterwards, because asynchronous JavaScript stuff isn't really in my skill set, because see above when I said I'm not a really good programmer. There is a possibility that we could write a browser extension that allowed people who accidentally found themselves at the official website that doesn't have a search engine on a particular page to opt them into going to the good version. Because we know exactly which page on Kildare Street to send them to based on what page they're on there. I do want to rebuild this because Kildare Street is a PHP app I mentioned earlier on. It's a PHP app that's so old that some of it's in PHP 3. It's completely untemplated. It actually writes HTML directly out of its classes. And I'm 80% away through rewriting the front end of the thing in Django. And because I'm not quite done with Leinster House, the thing I'm going to be doing before any of the other things we're talking about here is, if you're in Leinster House soon, using Kildare Street won't be free anymore. And I'm putting a paywall up that only applies to the Parliament. None of you will even see it. One of the things that was very annoying about when the shit hit the fan on September the 18th, 2012, is that that was like literally the same day we opened this. I was in the middle of a launch for FixMyStreet.ie, another site that we've just brought in from the UK, which these things need to exist. It turns out that somebody in Labour and or Fine Gael during the course of the last election campaign had looked over to the UK and seen FixMyStreet.com and thought that'd be good, and they wrote it into their programme for government. And FixMyStreet.ie, that exact URL, is written in the Fine Gael manifesto from 2011 and in the programme for government. And somebody and the Fine Gael elections office registered FixMyStreet.ie, and then didn't work there anymore when the election was over. And then it expired, and then I got it. So this website, as advertised in the programme for government, which has nothing at all to do with the government, is get out your phones and go to FixMyStreet.ie and see how it works. But basically, once again, like I said, from the very top, when you're dealing with end users, if you go check the register is another one that I want to fix sooner or later, because if you go to check the register.ie, the very first question it asks you is, which council do you live in? Why should you need to know the answer to that question in order to register to vote? The government has all the information it needs to answer that question for you, but it chooses not to do it. What FixMyStreet does, it uses Google geolocation, or on your phone uses GPS to pinpoint your location, and it feeds your coordinates that it determines that way into a web service. I didn't turn this keyboard on, didn't I? No. Called Mapit, which is a hard dependency for FixMyStreet. FixMyStreet, the website, actually took about 2 days to put together. This thing took about 3 months. We're to load up. This is where you are, by the way, right this second. You're in a district electoral division in Cork City called Southgate A. We're about there, I think. what FixMyStreet does, what you can do if you use this service, which is open to the web. If you're interested in doing anything with political geography in Ireland, I have done the hard work for you. You can feed this thing a coordinate in WGS84, in Irish Grid, in any coordinate system you fancy. And it will return for you either in this nice, pretty, not very pretty HTML rendering, or just as JSON, a list of every shape that contains the point you asked the question about. Here's Southgate A. If I go over here and say, show me things which cover this shape, you'll see that it's in the Garda division of Cork City. It's under Cork City Council, Garda region, Anglesey Street Police Station, the South European Parliamentary Constituency, Cork City South Central under Council, and lower down. No, I don't have. Okay. The one that's missing is the one that you might actually want, so I'll fix that later. But the Dole constituency, which doesn't show up on that list because the Dole constituency boundaries intersect, but don't cover this shape. Basically, you can, if you want to know where a point is in terms of the political geography in Ireland, you can use this thing. Anyway, so FixMyStreet became that. I opened it because the government, well, South Dublin County Council had opened a thing called Fix Your Street using a platform called Ushahidi, which they could install, which is less difficult to do than this is, and didn't involve massively violating OSI licensing agreements, which this probably did in the first place. It doesn't now, I hasten to add. And it uses, Ushahidi is a thing that was originally developed for monitoring disasters in crisis-torn parts of the world. Make of that what you will. What do we got next? Whilst we're talking about things that you can do with the exact same XML format that we've now started generating for Koivisto-Kokko, here's a thing for Australia. It's new. This is new, but the idea that it's based on is so old that it predates every single civic app in the UK and America. And there was a website in Britain called Public Whip, and basically what it says is it was born out of frustration that in Parliament, what the Whip's office tell members of Parliament to vote for and how strongly they tell them to vote for, because in the UK whips are underlined 1, 2 or 3 times depending on how many fingers you're going to get broken if you ignore the whip. Public Whip basically analysed which way people actually voted and published the votes. And then over here, you can't just make it, but what this says is policies. You can join this website and create a policy. Your policy might be in favour of marriage equality, for example. And you would just have a blank policy at that point. But then what you do is you go through parliamentary votes, all of which are in the website, and you go, somebody who was in favour of marriage equality would have voted yes or no on this vote, and no on this one, and yes on this one and this one, and no on this one. And then what this website does is compare people to your policies and determines whether they are strongly supportive, neither supportive nor opposed, opposed or strongly opposed to the policy you make. That is, what you wind up with there is what somebody once described as like one of the most powerful infographics that exists in parliamentary monitoring software. The UK version of Koivisto-Kokko, They Work For You, has a block. You remember when I showed you there was a block on the TD pages on our site, which says voting data, and there's nothing in it. In the UK, there is something in it. And what it says it says this MP is strongly in favour of renewing the Trident nuclear weapons system, or strongly opposed to benefit cuts, or one of those things. And lots of people get worked up about infographics. And it's like, what, can we put this in a chart, or can we make this a pretty thing, or can we make it a colour? But this is a single short sentence of words and letters that tells you instantly far more than any of those things can be. You can have infographics that don't have pictures in them. And this is one that, and I think that this is a thing they've done in Australia. The ingestion format for this website is the exact same XML that we're generating for Koivisto-Kokko already, which is why I have a still currently empty version of the exact same website running on our server. Here are all our members of Parliament. let's pick somebody who represents Double Cork South Central. I've already mentioned him before. He just happens to be first in alphabetical order. I'm not picking on Jerry. And there's no data in it at the moment, so you can't see any of the things he supports or opposes. But we want to build this, and unlike the other things I do, this I can build and open, but it won't be useful until people who are engaged and interested in politics or political causes or social movements actually get involved and start adding information to it. Because we'll have all the votes, but we won't. But visitors will do the interpretation. So this might take a little while to actually get going, even after it opens. Let me show you another thing that we're working on. A third thing from the UK. WhatDoTheyKnow.com. This is turned up on WhatDoTheyKnow.com. You can make a new Freedom of Information request. This wasn't a goer in Ireland, but we just spent 18 months changing the Freedom of Information Act. I don't know if you noticed, the €15 upfront fee for you to file a Freedom of Information request in Ireland has gone now, because the new FOI Act was passed in November. What this does, it lets you make a Freedom of Information request. That's boring. What's interesting is that when it sends your Freedom of Information request to the public body that is supposed to answer that request, they don't give them your email address. They make up a new email address for your one individual request. And then what happens is, that's a good example. We'll just take the top one. Then you find, here's the person making a request. That's the letter they sent. And because the email address that they received was for this request on this website and not to the individual, all the replies are automatically published immediately. They are sent in public on the website. There's another reply. Here, finally, is the actual data being asked for. We want to do that in Ireland. It's going to take a little while to get that finished, not least because there's no list in this country of which bodies are answerable to freedom of information in Ireland. So we're having to build our own, but this is what we're working on at the moment. Then again, Gavin Sheridan from the Story.ie, formerly of Storyful, is helping me make a list of every public body in Ireland that you can ask freedom of information requests to. So we want things from abroad that we don't have and that we should have. We are building them. So you can see both of those new things coming when we get around to them, because at the moment I'm a little bit busy putting a paywall up to Kildare Street for Leinster House. I'm sorry if I dragged on a little bit, but hopefully that was moderately interesting, and I'm done now, and thank you.
I'd say we'll just take one or two very quick questions, because we have our birthday pizzas cooling downstairs.
Oh, in that case, let's hurry up.
Does anybody have anything urgent? And they can always, you're going to go downstairs, John, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
John, how do you make a living out of this, John, if you don't mind me asking?
Funny you should ask that. That's one of the reasons we're going to put a paywall up on that stage. But no, thus far we've made, I got paid half time to fix the damage caused when the thing happened, as I mentioned earlier on. And apart from that, I help my other half sometimes with a large contract, because when she has a job that requires lots of large ETL stuff and heavy database nerdery, because she's a designer, developer, and this isn't her bag, I help her out with that, and that way sometimes my household is able to make more money through what Sabrina does. It helps enormously to have a very, very understanding spouse. I don't recommend this as a way to earn a living.
Cool. Very good. Thanks a million, John.
Your solutions are based on Ireland, UK, and Australia.
Yeah.
Have you tried to kind of sell them to other countries? Because, like FixMyStreet, it seems something that you can easily adapt to other countries.
Well, FixMyStreet is being done by my society, the people who actually originally did it, into other countries. I would say though, if any of you happen to be involved in any local authorities, FixMyStreet is completely themable, and one thing that we can do is do a version of FixMyStreet for your local authority that looks like the local authority website, and even has mobile phone apps that with the council branding on. That might be a way that we can make some money out of FixMyStreet, but thus far Who's got the time to do the sale? I don't. Not I.
Okay. Thanks.
Um,
You can ask
just
your
one
questions
thing.
afterwards.